honestly, I still can close my eyes and like I still feel the hit. Like people ask me about that all the time, and it's like, oh, did you go shoulder to shoulder, helmet to helmet? I was like, oh, I felt his helmet through my shoulder. Like I felt that hit. So that's something that is it sticks with you.
Welcome to Hey Where'd You Go? I'm Collin Kushner. The goal of my podcast is to catch up with former high school, collegiate, and professional athletes showcasing what they are doing today. This week's guest played college football at Stanford. He also played in the National Football League, the Canadian Football League, and now he's the Chief Operating Officer over at Atavus, a tackling analytics, education, and consulting firm based in Seattle, Washington. Please welcome Mr. Kerry Carter. Kerry, first off, how are you, my friend? How's life up in Seattle?
I'm doing well, man. It's you can't say it's too sunny today, but life is good. No complaints, man. All things considered.
Is it ever sunny in Seattle? It's
Oh
always
yeah.
sunny in Seattle. That's a new show, right?
Well, we like to tell people that it's not sunny here all that much, as we want to keep the population down. We've been having all these folks come up here from the Bay, and increasing our housing prices and stuff. So for the general public, yes, it's always raining here.
I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. And Kerry, I want to start from the very beginning. You were born in Trinidad. What was life like over there?
I grew up with my mom, dad, in a house that my grandfather had built. So, up top, my grandfather, grandmother, aunts and uncles lived up top, and there were two kind of apartments downstairs. So myself, my mom, and my dad lived in one, and her sister and her husband and son lived in the other. And yeah, I mean, growing up in Trinidad was great. I had being around so much family, a lot of love. I just have great memories of just playing outside with friends and family, and dancing and playing everything from cricket to soccer. Sports was always big for us growing up, but so was dancing. So I think that helped a little bit with my footwork later on in life.
How does being born in Trinidad, right, spending part of your childhood there, how does American football factor into that?
Early on in my life, I don't even think I saw a football game. Maybe one or two where I was like, why do they keep running into each other? Just run around it. It wasn't until I moved to Toronto. I was about 10 years old. And when we moved up to Toronto, then a couple years later, I got into football. Actually, of course, you go to Canada, you're gonna play a little hockey. So, started playing some hockey and some other things. But once I found football, probably in around sixth or seventh grade was the first time I started playing. And it was mostly because my little brother wanted to play because his friends were playing, and my mom was like, well, he's not going to go by himself, so you better go and sign up too. And so we went and signed up for this league called the North York Bandits. And that was kind of the start of it, man, where my obsession and the passion and everything kind of grew from there.
It's crazy to think, Kerry, that your passion for football happened to be in Ontario, right? Because like you just said, hockey reigns supreme. I remember I was there with my brother. It was during bowl season. And we wanted to find out what happened in the Clemson game, what happened in this game. And you want to know what? They led with regular season hockey. And as a hockey fan, I love it. But I find that extremely fascinating. When did you know that football was going to be your main sport?
Honestly didn't come till later on in my high school career. My math teacher and my English teacher were both coaching football. And at first I didn't play in high school because I was playing in my like summer league, and they actually didn't want us to play both. And but he kept asking me about it and said, man, just come out to one practice, right? Just come out to a practice, see how it goes. And so as a freshman, I went out there. Went out to practice, got the ball, ran a couple people over, and then I had to leave because I had to pick up. I have two younger brothers, and I had to go pick up one of them from daycare. So I was like, Coach, I got to go. He's like, all right, man. I mean, are you going to come back though? I was like, yeah. I'll talk to my mom and see if we can work something out. But ended up, coming back and really enjoying it and having a lot of success, specifically in high school. Yeah, so that was my freshman year, and then my sophomore year, we ended up going to our equivalent of a state championship and winning. And so that I think is what kind of sparked everything for me, just seeing the success I was able to have early on in my career. And even though I was still involved and loved playing other sports, football was the one that I had the biggest upside.
Kerry, what was the recruiting process like coming out of high school in Canada? What was that like? Were you receiving offers from Canadian institutions as well, strictly from the States?
In Canada, you got to do a little bit more to get some more exposure. And so I actually wrote a letter to about 100 schools in the U.S. And, that's a little dating myself, but, send all these letters out and then and then I sent out highlight tape, right? So send out highlight tapes and then they would write you back or contact you to get more information, more tape, invite you to camps and things like that. But it was initially because of that initial outreach that I think what sparked it. And them seeing the highlight tapes and things like that. I got my first offer or first, kind of call and talk from North Texas. And, but, as when I started talking to them, they asked me, like, how many, have you gotten in touch with schools? I was like, well, not yet. And they saw my film. He was like, oh yeah, you're not going to come here. I was like, whoa, what do you mean? Why wouldn't I? I mean, you guys are the first ones to give me an offer. He's like, yeah, once the other schools see you're not going to come here. You'll get every offer you need.
And this is the guy from North Texas telling you this?
Yeah.
That's not a great recruiting strategy.
It was interesting to me. Once people see you, you'll start getting offers. And that's kind of how it went. I ended up going to Ohio State, Michigan State, Michigan, Wisconsin, and then Stanford was my last visit. But once I made that trip out to Palo Alto, it made it tough, being an island boy and loving the sunshine. It was kind of refreshing to be out there in like December and it's sunny and they take you down the 280 and drive you a Palm Drive and they make it hard. It's hard to say no.
I can't blame you, Kerry. Like you said, I mean, you get that sunshine. I mean, it's so beautiful too on the peninsula. And again, you go from Trinidad, then you go all the way to Ontario, which I'm sure you're like, hey, mom and dad, where are we going and what are we doing? And then you made the call to go to Stanford for football and a fantastic education at the same time. What was that Stanford experience like initially?
Moving across the country to go to college away from all your friends and family and stuff, it's a difficult thing to do. But I think I was also very focused on the opportunity, and exactly what you said. Stanford and the ability to attend Stanford wasn't about a 4-year decision; it's a 40-year decision. When I was on my recruiting trip, I would always ask the same questions to the players and ask them about what they want to do after football or what they want to do once they finish college. And, a lot of the schools, it was, I want to play in the league. And I love that. And that's what I want too. But hardly ever did. It was only at Stanford where when I asked that question, they would tell me, well, I'm majoring in electrical engineering and this is what I want to do. And yeah, if I get to, a chance to play in the NFL, it'd be awesome. So the order of that mattered to me in a sense. Like I knew I'd go out, I knew I'd play a great ball, I'd get an opportunity there. But that at some point that ends and you're going to have to rely on all the other things that you've done in your education and background and things. So that kind of made it an easy decision for me. I still have great fond memories of being on the farm and having a lot of success there early. And Stanford was, Rose Bowl my freshman year, and then kind of a down sophomore year. And then I think we went to the Seattle Bowl my junior year, and then kind of down my senior year. So it had been kind of up and down.
October 28th, 2000, University of Washington came to Palo Alto to play you guys. One of those rainy, dreary Bay Area days, as you and I both know, they're cold and it's not the best scenario. What do you remember the most about that day in particular?
Yeah, obviously that's a memorable one for me. I would say, so that was my sophomore year. It was the first time Washington came down there. Oddly enough, I think we went up to Washington my freshman year and I got hurt in that game. So I was really looking forward to playing them because I think that was the only game that I missed. And then yeah, it was just one of those kind of cold, rainy days, and we knew we were in for a battle. We're playing against Marcus Tuiasosopo and this kind of really vaunted team that had a ton of success over the last few years. Um, but I think that the everything kind of came to a head that day for me coming through. I believe it was the second quarter, running through the line of scrimmage. Took a handoff and went through the line, kind of broke a tackle, and then the safety came up and put my shoulder down. Got tackled and went down to the ground, and then got up and started walking back to the huddle. But then when I looked back, I noticed that the safety wasn't, he didn't get up, and then they were calling folks onto the field, and didn't realize it at that time, but what had happened, he kind of dropped his head as we were going into contact, and lost all feeling in his arms and legs, and ended up being rushed to Stanford Hospital, where he was, they said he was paralyzed. And Curtis Williams was his name, number 25 for University of Washington. And I think in the heat of it, you don't realize how much it affects you, because you got adrenaline, you're still going, you don't know the extent of what's happened because he's just taken off the field. But I think that moment for me was it was probably after the game, and then kind of hearing about what had happened and finding out where he'd been taken, and all those things is where it really started to hit me. Like no one wants to be involved in something like that, but I thought about Curtis, I thought about his family, and this game of football that we all love, and it's giving me this opportunity to be at one of the best institutions in the country, also has a lot of risks, right? And that was, to me, one of the worst things that could happen to anyone involved in the game, is to lose your ability to, first of all, play the game, but how it affects your ability to just work and function and walk and all those things. So my heart went out to Curtis and his family. And I think at the time, I was 19 years old, and my coaches, Coach Tyrone Willingham, and all the coaches wanted to do a good job of protecting me, so they kind of shielded me from everything. They didn't allow me to go visit him in the hospital or contact his family, which, like I said, at the time, I think was the right thing. Me, still a kid. But looking back on it, I wish I had the ability to do some of those things, because it's not in my personality to not address something like that. That's such a huge deal, and affects someone and their family and their livelihood so negatively. So as much as I remember that day and that feeling, and like honestly, I still can close my eyes and like I still feel the hit. Like people ask me about that all the time, and it's like, oh, did you go shoulder to shoulder, helmet to helmet? I was like, oh, I felt his helmet through my shoulder. Like I felt that hit. So that's something that is it sticks with you. And I think it was about maybe about a year or so later, or probably not even a year, where I was training. I was at a training facility, and I remember I was warming up on the bike, and I actually looked up and I saw on Sports Center that Curtis had passed away, and I think that's where a lot of the emotions really kind of came out. So it was a really tough thing to hear and deal with, and I think it was compounded for me because I never really got to address it with him. I never really got to go check on him and see him or get to know him better, just because of my involvement in that. And it wasn't something, I didn't want to sit and blame myself. And that's what everyone has kept pushing. It was like, hey, it's not your fault. You're just running the ball and you're just doing your job. And yeah, that's the right response. That's the football response. But from a human perspective, I mean, it didn't matter. It was just I was involved in that, and it affected somebody else's life, and it was something that I wanted to address and deal with, and never really got to. So that's what I think made it the toughest thing for me, and still sticks with me, to this day.
How do you not personalize something like that, Kerry? Because again, like you said, there's two sides. You have the football side, and then you have the human side. So how do you How do you kind of navigate those roads, especially as a teenager? I think that's an awful lot to try and process, especially when you have two completely different sides.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can't say that I didn't personalize it because it made me kind of, it made me take a harder look at everything that I was doing, right? I mean, obviously going to Stanford, I love that. I love playing football, but it also made me look at, well, is this, what's important about this game to me? And I think it just made me take a long and hard look at myself and my kind of goal and my purpose. Because when you think about mortality and you think about what could be and the legacy that you're leaving in this world and things like that, that's all personal, right? That there's no amount of kind of deflection or protection could change that for me. So yeah, it became a very personal thing and something that I held kind of near and dear, and I wanted to find a path in my life to um, I think my mantra became like inspire and instill hope, right? If I can do that to in any situation, in any setting, and with people that I meet, and I can have a positive effect on you know everyone that I interact with, then that's part of my contribution to this world, and it's bigger than football. And I think that's where I think it was always bigger than football, like going to Stanford and all those things. But I think that experience even more so made me focus on, well, how am I gonna take this and use it for something positive in my life and turn it into something positive in my life because Curtis won't have that ability to. And so I felt like it was my responsibility to take it and do something with it and not let it just be another incident that happened that nothing good came out of it.
I think that's a fantastic way to look at it, right? How to live a life with purpose. And I think, don't get me wrong, when you have success on the gridiron, people will remember that, but I think it's middle of the pack, right? There are higher and more impactful things that you can do with your life that people will. I think my parents always used to say, Colin, no one's ever going to remember your bank account. No one's ever going to remember what's in your savings. They're going to remember, the kind of person that you are and the things that you do to help others and to impact them in a positive way.
People remember how you make them feel more than anything. So that's why this idea of like positively affecting other people in any situation. I've always been an optimist, and probably even more so than most. But I think that it's you kind of owe it to yourself and you owe it to the world to live a life of meaning and purpose. And I think that's part of the reason why we're put here. Just from a spiritual perspective, we're put here to add some value to this world and to make it better in some way, shape, or form. And kind of our goal and our mission is to figure out what that is and then really go all in on it and make that your life's work. And some of us find it, not everyone does. And some of us find it for shorter periods than others and some longer. But I think that is the mission and the goal.
If you had to send a message to a 19-year-old Kerry Carter, or not even just yourself, but the youth today, maybe someone's in a similar situation as you were in back in 2000, what advice would you give them?
One of the things that I think we take for granted is our platform, right? We all have a platform nowadays. Like that's one of the benefits in my mind of having this connectivity and, social media and being able to connect with people around the world. We've been given this gift of a platform, and it's really about what you do with it. It's how you utilize the platform to further your goal, your mission, the things you want to accomplish in life and your vision of success. But I think a lot of people, they look at it in a way that's somewhat skewed, right? Like if you don't have a huge audience, then you can't really have an effect. If you're not, The Rock with hundreds of millions of followers, what can you do? But you think about any action that happens, it starts with like you yourself and the people closest to you and the people right around them. And so I think we all have this like propensity to affect change more than we realize just by using the platform that we have. And that may be your audience on Twitter or Instagram, but it also just may be, your book club. It may be, the Facebook group that you're involved in that's really around your neighborhood and your community, maybe your church. So I think in just finding what that platform is for you and utilizing it to its fullest effect. And if that platform just so happens to be, football, don't lose sight of that, right? If you're building the platform, it starts with the foundation. If one of those foundations is football or basketball or, volleyball, whatever it is, focus on that and be the best at that, because it will afford you so many opportunities in other areas. And that for me is what football has done. It's given me a platform to do all these other, awesome things in life and experience all these other great things. So that's probably the advice I would give for anyone, at that time is use what you have and use it to the best of your ability, because it's a gift, and, positive or negative, it's really about what you do with it and how that can affect positive change in this world.
Very well said, and you touched on such a poignant point from my perspective, that it doesn't matter if you have 500 million followers, 2 followers. If you can impact change and help at least one person, or my mantra is, if I can make one person laugh, each day, then I've done my job. And friends and family and other outside sources are just like, one person, that's a really low bar. And I was like, at the end of the day, like, if you could do it for one person, then maybe they'll light up, and then maybe they see 3 people because they're feeling good, and then it just kind of spreads that way. Big advocate of that, and I could see that you are as well, which is fantastic. After Stanford, you went off to the National Football League. You signed with the Seattle Seahawks, and you played with Sean Alexander. What was that moment like for you when you knew you were finally making it to the pros?
There's no one that goes into the draft just thinking, oh, I'm just going to go in and be a free agent. Everyone wants to be drafted and hear their name called. And, I wasn't fortunate enough to have that happen under the circumstances, but I felt like I got into a good situation with the Seahawks, because, I met with them at the combine, and, I think their GM at the time was probably one of the only ones that, said, hey, we're really like you, really like what you do, all those things. And so, it gave me a little bit of confidence. And, talking to, some of my coaches in college, they ran a similar offense. So ran the West Coast offense with the same verbiage, which for me, like, it gives me a real advantage going in there, knowing what, 22 protection is, or red formation, these things that you normally have to go in and learn a complete offense. Now I go in and I'm already ahead of the curve, so I could just go in and play. And so there was no guarantee for me. I came in as an undrafted free agent on a team that had, one of the best running backs in the league, future, league MVP. And they've always had, they just drafted a running back in the second round the year before, Maurice Morris from Oregon. So, I didn't have any pressure. For me, it was just, I can just go out and play. And I just, coming off of everything that had happened with Curtis. And then, we had a really tough senior year. I think we won like 2 games my senior year. So it was almost just a refreshing change for me to just be, in the NFL and to have this experience. But it was challenging. It was fun, all of the above. And then I had great guys to work with, like Sean Alexander, Mac Strong, who's I'm a big fan of Mac. He kind of took me under his wing and taught me how to be a pro, and, how to conduct myself around the locker room. And I think that all those things were, even more memorable for me.
You signed with Seattle. You were there for a couple seasons. Then you tagged on with Washington. Unfortunately, you suffered a torn ACL, which kind of shortened up your stay there. At what point did you pivot to the CFL?
I knew that the Alouettes, Montreal, had drafted me the year previously and had my rights. I started thinking about the prospects of either, okay, well, do I sit out and wait for training camp and see if, I get an opportunity then? But then I also had to make sure I was, 100% ready to go. And I just wasn't confident that I would be, because I had to come back to Seattle and just do all the rehab and training and stuff on my own. So I waited until training camp started to see, okay, after a week or 2, am I getting any calls? And, nothing of note was really coming through. So I gave my agent the go ahead. I was like, yeah, man, I'll try it. I'll go up there for a year, do my thing, and then just come right back to the NFL. But didn't quite work out that way. Honestly, the first year was a little bit hesitant, just coming back, wearing a knee brace, all those things. And I think the team as well was going through some change. But going into the next year, they brought on Mark Trestman. And I remember we flew out to, I want to say, like Vegas or Utah or something, somewhere out there, to have some meetings and meet him and all those things. And he came in, and he's a lawyer by trade, and kind of really cerebral guy. So started talking about things in terms of like, okay, how are we going to carry ourselves, and your demeanor walking into me, like all things that like I really connected with. And I think a lot of other guys did too. And that's probably the moment that like kind of shifted for me. It's like, I think I want to stay here and do a little bit more and learn a little bit more and see, get more tape as well. Right. I don't feel like I had a lot of tape the year before. And so that's where, everything kind of shifted, and I really enjoyed that CFL experience. And then we, went on to do a lot of great things over the next 5 years with Coach Trestman, going to 3 Grey Cups in a row, winning 2 of them, and winning that back to back. And, the things that he did there, weren't just about like us as players, but it was about us as men, us as fathers, all these things. And I think I just reacted really well to that and gravitated towards it. And so never ended up making it back to the league, but didn't regret it at all either, because I enjoyed my CFL experience so much.
Once your career concluded in the CFL, was there a little bit of a period, like a limbo period, so to speak, or did you know the entire time the direction that you wanted to go post-football?
I wish I did, honestly, but one of the reasons that I really liked the structure of the CFL is because I've always been an entrepreneur. I've always been kind of, wanting to find new and different ways to connect and looking for different avenues. And so what it allowed me to do, because we were essentially on for 6 months and then you're off. It doesn't have the same schedule as the NFL, where you have to be there for workouts and, mini camps and train camps and all those things. So I had all this time. And so I did everything from like financial services and insurance. And my buddy, Coy Wire, works at CNN, started a clothing line. And so I was like, man, I'd love to learn about that. So I like jumped on board there. So I just did all these things to kind of figure out what I liked and what I would gravitate towards. And actually the last like year and a half or so that I was playing up there, I started doing a lot more focused work. And when I came back to Seattle in the off season, I connected with an old teammate of mine, Joe Tafoya, and he was working in the tech space around mobile, and I was really interested in that space. So he just allowed me to come on and tag along to meetings and conference calls and all those things. And I really found something that I like there, in that space. And it's kind of this, we talked about this intersection of sports and technology, and, how do we leverage the things that we have in our own audience and our platform, kind of things I was talking about before. How do you leverage those things while you're playing so that you can take advantage of them when you're finished playing? And so that's kind of where the spark started. And so coming out of football, I actually left a year early, because I had another year on my contract, because we had really gotten into this business and we started something and we had some good momentum going. So it was more out of the fact that I kind of prepped for it in a sense. And part of that reason was when I tore my ACL and it was kind of sitting in the hospital bed and thinking about like, man, yeah, so football, like if I wasn't able to get back from this injury, what's next? I didn't have anything at that time. There's nothing that I could specifically think of that I could do. And, my major at Stanford was medical anthropology. So I wanted to be a doctor, and, you couldn't just turn and do that. So I'd have to, there'd be a lot of steps there. So I think it just gave me, it sped up my timetable a little bit to figure things out. And so it made my transition a lot smoother, because it was almost a forced transition in a sense.
How important is it to kind of have foresight, so to speak? Because like you said, when you were recovering from the torn ACL, the wheels started churning. How important is it for athletes in general, just everyone, to kind of get those wheels churning early on? That way, maybe it is a smoother transition.
Oh, absolutely. I say that, but I say with a caveat too, because I understand that to be at the highest level and to be the best in all those things, specifically in sports, like it's almost this, you have to believe that you're invincible. right? You have to believe that you're the best. Like no one can beat you. That this is everything, and you have to pour your heart and soul and everything into it, and your training and your sleep and your all of these things. And I don't think I want to discount any of that, but we know so much now about the length of careers and what happens to guys and the kind of the trajectory of things and the trends that you have to prepare for life after football. Because even if you have a great career and you played 10 plus years, you finish the league and you're 31, 32, you still have a lot of life ahead of you, right? A lot of life left to live. So you want to make sure that, while you're playing and while you have the platform, you start to kind of venture off and look at different things. Nowadays, because of the pace of development and the rate at which you can start a business, it gives you more opportunity to explore.
So, Kerry, you're now the Chief Operating Officer at Atavus, which is a tackling analytics, education, and consulting firm. This kind of segues perfectly from your playing career.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think finding something that kind of works, in such a way that it kind of connects a lot of things in your life. So for me, I think of all the things that we talked about, right? We talked about my time, learning about this idea of technology and mobile and things like that, and a lot of things that I did during that time with some of my old partners was around marketing and kind of branding and things like that, events, and honestly, the experience with Curtis, something like that has so profoundly affected my life. I've always looked for a way to kind of give back and connect specifically, due to that experience. I never even thought about this idea of, well, you should tackle differently. If we're having all these concussions and things with the head, then, we should take the head out of the game. But I think what the advent of the helmet has done, it's kind of given us a false sense of security in a sense. Like when you have better pads and protections, guys tend to kind of use themselves as projectiles and not put so much care into how they're hitting, right, and how they're approaching a tackle. And so when I heard about what they were doing at Atavus, I actually heard about it about maybe 2015. I knew a friend of mine was their PR director. And so he told me about the company, but it was still a rugby company at the time. And so he's told me about the rugby side and told me about when they got into football a little bit, and started doing some stuff with the Seahawks around this hawk tackle. And it wasn't until I actually went in there to one of their investor events and I kind of heard about what they were doing and how they approached it from both a science and a kind of art perspective. So they looked at what they did in rugby, looked at how frequently people were tackling and how frequently they're, making head contact. And, when you thought about how many tackles a rugby player is making in a game versus a football player, where on average rugby, they're making 20 plus tackles a game on a regular basis. And if Bobby Wagner's making 20 plus tackles a game, I mean, he's already all pro, he's already all world, but, they're writing about it in the papers every day. And so just learning about that, and they had this approach and it was a little bit different. And, obviously it connected me back to what happened with Curtis. And I always think back to that situation. Well, what could have changed that, right? Like, it's a piece of equipment? No. Was it a, wearable of some kind? No. I mean, the rules? Maybe. But in the end, it came down to technique. The only thing I feel like could have changed that situation is, Curtis's head not being involved in the tackle. And so that instantly clicked for me. It's like, oh, I have the ability now to affect another, kind of group of people, young people specifically, because this is about teaching proper tackling technique from, to kids all the way from youth all the way up to the NFL. But obviously the majority of the players are in youth and high school. And so when I thought about that and, having the ability to work with a company like that and actually affect something positive around the game, everyone knew about, the concussion movie and everything that had come out with the NFL. So it just seemed like kind of a natural thing for me. And at the time they didn't have a role. It wasn't like I went in there and I applied for this role or anything. It was just, we just had a really good connection. And the more I talked to them, the more I wanted to learn and the more they got interested in me. And so initially went in doing some kind of business development stuff, but that, quickly, kind of escalated and grew into the role that I'm in now, where I kind of work within our department, but, I work with every team in the company. One of the biggest things we've accomplished to date is being the exclusive, tackling certification provider for the state of Texas. And that's over 20,000 plus coaches now that have to go through our certification program. And then you think about the effect that that has on the, 50 plus kids that are on each of those teams, right? That to me is, okay, using your platform for something that is meaningful and connects you back. And so it kind of came full circle for me, wanting to find a way to connect to what happened with Curtis, but also, do something that I was passionate about with the game of football and something that I'd become, learned to love around technology and analytics. And so it was just kind of the perfect combination of things, and it turned into this great role. Looking to affect, more coaches' lives positively in terms of how they can teach this, because parents are worried about it and fans are worried about it. But I know what the game of football has done for my life. And if I can, just like you said, if you can make one person laugh a day, if I can help one kid not make that decision, and go in there with the right approach and keeping the head out of it and, reducing their risk of injury, then, I mean, that for me is everything.
As a 19-year-old back in 2000, after the incident with Curtis Williams, did you ever think that it would come full circle, years later, where you get to impact change, make the game safer, and teach, anyone from a youth all the way up to an adult?
Not so directly. I always hoped that, I would have the ability to do something that was impactful and can affect that change. But, I didn't see it coming in such a direct way in terms of like talking about tackling specifically, and talking about keeping the head out of it and, the safety and all that of the game. So, I've always had hopes for it, but I think this was kind of, in a way destined, kind of fate in my mind. I do believe in that. And so you get these opportunities presented to you. It's up to you what you want to do with them. And I think I really kind of just took this one and ran with it. This was my first foray into kind of the startup world, that I wasn't like funding myself and things like that. And so it made it that much more special and unique because I was just passionate about it, and it didn't feel like work. It just felt like this is like a mission, right? It's our mission to, help as many of these kids as possible and help parents see the value in the game of football. To me, is the ultimate team game and can teach you so much about life. And it's prepared me for everything that I'm doing now. Even if it wasn't, football related, I think being in the business world, having a football background has prepared me tremendously for that.
Kerry, we all know football is such a physical sport. I mean, how do you make it safer? I really do, aside from the technical aspect of it, I really do love the analytics side. How does analytics kind of play into making the game safer?
When you look at tackling, we've had kind of this antiquated view of it where it's either you made it or you missed it, right? But we haven't really looked into a lot of the data around, well, what do good tacklers do that, people that aren't great tacklers do? And we started to look at, the amount of time that their head was involved in contact. That's an obvious one, right? So, because that puts you at risk for not just concussions, but also other soft tissue injuries like neck injuries and stingers and things like that. But then we start to look at, which shoulder you were using or how much shoulder contact you had and what that did to, the yards after contact. So you have to, what we did and what I think was very smart is you have to connect it back to performance. Because when you're talking to football coaches, yeah, there's a way to go out there and be safe and not hit anybody, but then you won't have a chance of winning the game. But if you look at what, teams that tackled really well, allowed, got off the field, allowed really low yards after contact, what they did well is they tackled with their shoulder. They used their shoulder a high percentage of the time. And what that did is that allowed them to have more body on body contact. They went in with intention. So they knew not just, where they were going to hit them, but they were thinking about what they were going to hit them with. And they drilled these things in practice so that it became a natural thing and it became a reaction in the game. And so we just broke it down into these phases so that you can understand it as a coach and, be able to break it down and teach it to your athletes so that they understand what they do really well, where they struggle, and how they can get better. And if you know those three things as an athlete, I think you can have success. And we just took that approach and applied it to tackling, an area of the game that we feel like wasn't highly, analyzed. And we found trends. We found a lot of trends in terms of what teams that had a lot of success did well and where they struggled. And then we start to look at availability. So if you're tackling the right way and you're not putting yourself in situations where you're risking, neck injuries and shoulder injuries and things like that, then you're available more. And so we start to look at all the data around it to kind of prove our point. And we found, the teams that are doing it this way are reducing the amount of times their head is involved in contact. Their shoulder contact percentages are really high. 50% of the time they're going to the contact and using their shoulder. And that's resulting in performance improvements.
How are you guys getting that data? Because, when you're dealing with youth all the way up to the pros, I feel like, if you're dealing with a franchise, let's just say the Detroit Lions, right? I feel like getting that data is probably much easier as opposed to when you're dealing with maybe like a youth program, just outside Seattle or something like that.
It's still highly manual. We have analysts that watch film. What we've done is we've put a process in place to help them get through that a lot faster. We've broken it up into kind of pre-contact and contact. And then in each phase, there's like specific things that they're looking for. So once on a play, you've identified all the tacklers that are involved, whether they made it or missed it. Now we're going to look at, okay, what did they do pre-contact? So everything leading up to contact. How did they avoid a blocker? Did they go through it? Did they go around it? Once they got, within, 5 yards of the ball carrier, we're looking at their footwork, their angle, their leverage, all these things. And then once they get into contact, they're going to look at, shoulder placement, head placement, whether their timing is good. So we call it strike timing. That's like when you get your foot down in the ground and your shoulder and you're making contact with, good hip leverage. And these are easy things to see once you know what you're looking for, and you tend to see them over and over again. When you go down to like youth, it's more about just coaching the coaches, right? It's not so much about the data. It's about, okay, here are the things you need to work on in practice, because that's when you're building those skills. And now if you're practicing the right things and you're evaluating it the right way in practice, then when you see it in the game, it shows up differently and it's easy for a coach to see. So we don't do like that detailed analytics work for youth team. We'll do it in some shape or form for high schools as well, not as detailed as we would for college and not as detailed as we would for pro. So we've kind of scaled it, over that spectrum. And that's happened over the last few years, where initially when I came on board, we had kind of a one size fits all model, and it was kind of everything, they got all the data. And but then we realized that it wasn't, first of all, it's not scalable that way. And not all the high school teams and youth teams and whatnot will use that data. They don't have the capability, capacity, to put that into play. And a lot of the issues that we're seeing were kind of repeated at that level. So it made it a little bit easier to say, hey, let's work on these core things for these youth groups. And if we see a trend, it's either pre-contact or contact, and then we'll tell you what to work on.
Kerry, if you're dealing though with, let's just say, an old school coach, right? Old school mentality. Hey, buddy, lead with the head. How do you talk them out of it? I mean, do you personally go in there and you kind of go off of your experiences as a player, or how do you kind of take that old school mindset and be like, listen, like, we have the analytics, we have the technique, this is what you have to do?
When we are able to go in and we talk to coaches about, okay, well, if you're going to tell a player to do something, you have to have a reason, right? So if you tell them to use your head, so is your head being used for power or for control, right? That's the question we pose to them. And it's, well, maybe it's power. Okay, well, what aspect of that is used for power? Like, because all the research shows that your head is the most easily manipulated thing. And because of that, and because of the fact that you're usually not ready for contact, that's what causes concussions, right? Because you're getting hit in different places and you're not prepared for it. It's the anticipation. So when we started one of the easiest ways to show this is to watch a couple of games of their film. And then we can show them the data. And we can also show them data from a bunch of our previous clients. Look at the performance when the head is involved in contact, and look at the performance when the head is not involved. Look at the performance when they're using their shoulder in contact and when they're not, right? When they're making arm tackles, and whenever it gets out to a certain point, we're like, okay, where all this is shoulder. If they're getting body on body contact, all of the stats are in your favor. They're getting them down faster, allowing less yards after contact. Their head isn't involved in it, and they're available more. When you start doing some of the other things in arm tackling and projectile, throwing themselves in and not being, actually going in with a plan, you see that in the data. So I think it's just showing the coaches that, what you're doing in practice has to show up on the field. And if that's not happening, you have to understand why. And so we break that down and we show them what's happening in the game. And then we actually show them, here's what you need to do in practice. And here's the things you need to work on all the way down to the drills. But if you had two guys that made 9 out of 10 tackles, who performed better? Well, now we're going to have to look deeper. How many yards after contact did that first person let up? How many times was their head involved in contact? Was there any injuries as a result of tackling? So we give them that information to help them see, and so that they can really articulate it to their players and articulate the value. And the value becomes really clear when you start thinking about, well, did he actually perform better because he used his head?
It's amazing, right? Because when you give him all that information that you just conveyed to me, I mean, think about that. It's hard to refute. Okay, great. Like, we're losing these ball games, maybe let's say by a field goal. You provide them all this data. So I feel like, if you're that coach, I feel like you have no choice. I mean, I should say everyone has a choice, but I feel like you have no choice but to be like, okay, we have to go. I mean, you have to go off the analytics, which is why I find it so interesting how analytics are used in sports today. I mean, it blows my mind on a daily basis.
Coaches go off of gut instinct and feel, and I think the analytics is just a way to kind of check against that in a sense, right? Like, I'm making this call because I believe this is going to happen. It's like, okay, yeah, I believe this is going to happen, but I also looked at the data and know that on third downs they run this play to the left side, 32% of the time, because that's where their Pro Bowl tackle is. So they're using data right now to make decisions. We're just giving it to them in a different format, in a way that's like easily consumable, so that they can make those decisions, not just at game time, but in their preparation as well.
Kerry, from your perspective, what does the game of football look like, let's call it 15 years from now?
I hope it looks, similar to what it is now, in terms of, people like the strategy, the competitiveness, the athleticism, and all those things. The big hits are a part of it, but I think there's ways to, as we're seeing now, right? There's ways to do that without it ending up in injuries, specifically, concussions and things of that nature. So I hope that the game is being played at the highest level, where they're protecting themselves by just doing the things that are beneficial and are actually going to add to the value of what you're coaching. I think more about when people introduce young athletes to tackle. I think that's where we'll see some of that, maybe get shifted in terms of when they're going to allow kids to play tackle football. I think some of that legislation is being, considered around the country in different states. So I don't know if it's absolutely necessary to have your child in tackle football from the time they can walk and run. Can they learn some of the things without being in tackle? Absolutely. But it has to be taught right. It has to be taught well, and you have to prepare them for what's coming. And I think that there's like an in-between, right? There's a 7-on-7 where there's no contact. It's really just, just a passing league, and you can get into bad habits. But at the same time, if you understand what that transition looks like and what you're trying to accomplish with the move to tackle, then I think you treat 7-on-7 a little differently, and you focus on, the pre-contact elements, and you help them focus on footwork and leverage and angle and, block shedding and things like that. And you work on the elements of contact differently, and you work on them maybe using bags and things like that until they get to a point where they're comfortable enough with their bodies and they can control their bodies in a way that they can, take the approach that they're being coached, by anyone that's looking at this method and looking at like the rugby style tackling or shoulder tackling, however you want to term it.
What are your personal goals over at Atavus and personal goals just outside of work entirely?
I think our goal at Atavus is to, you know, in a way, make it the status quo, right? I don't think about everyone wanting to shoulder tackle. I mean, it's just tackling, right? We're just teaching you the most efficient way to bring somebody down to the ground, and we're looking at the numbers to do that. And so, I want to be able to affect more change across the landscape. I think Texas has been a huge kind of stake in the ground for us. I started working with the state of Georgia, and we, got stuff with Indiana, Arkansas, and all these other states. So I want to, continue to expand on that, because I think the more, we can make this kind of the accepted norm, the better it would be. So I think that the goal for Atavus is just that, continuing to expand and affect more lives in a positive way, and use some of these kind of partnerships and stuff to spread that message, to that younger level, because that's where it has to happen.
Kerry Carter, really appreciate the time, my friend. A truly an amazing story and an inspiration, and really looking forward to sharing this with the world.
I appreciate it, man. And yeah, thank you for having me on. I love what you're doing and highlighting, where a lot of guys are. You spend so much time dedicating your life to this sport and to this game, and then when you walk away, you kind of feel like you lose a lot of that. And so I think what you're doing to help highlight that for a lot of guys will be appreciated, and showing them that they continue to have value, no matter what direction they decided to go after football. But I think it does need to be recognized. So I appreciate you recognizing that.
Make sure to follow me for more incredible stories with former athletes. That's at Collin Kushner on all of your favorite social media platforms. Plus, don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and a video version on YouTube.